Welcome back to the Growing Band Director Podcast. This is episode number 211. I'm here with Trae Blanco. Trae, how's it going?
It's great, Kyle. Coming at
Good.
you from the sunny, warm state of Indiana. It's great.
Great. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation again. Glad to be back.
If people haven't listened to the first one, it was episode 12. I forget what we called
Wow.
it. Habits of a Successful Teacher or something, having nothing to
Yeah,
do with the Habits series. But yeah.
sure.
So
Yeah,
this episode's coming out right around Veterans Day, I believe, right after Veterans Day. So as people are kind of planning ahead towards next year, I was hoping we could just have a quick discussion about some Veterans Day appropriate pieces that I'm telling you, it took me 20 years to realize I have a November concert. Maybe I should do something that's Veterans Day. Like I always think of it when I'm at the concert, but I always forget when I'm programming for the fall to include something. So I know some
for
people don't
sure.
have a concert around them, right? It's more like a Halloween concert
Sure.
or later. But yeah, I've got a couple. You've got a couple. Why don't you start with one?
Yeah, I think that is a tricky place to program. I think so often our brains go to like, oh, Americana music. I have to play the hardest things on the face of the planet that we hear the Marine Band play, live on July 4th. But I think there's a lot of other great stuff that's out there. I was going to highlight for anyone who has a younger band, Matt Conaway has done several, I don't want to say arrangements, several editions of marches, great Susan marches for Americana type things, um, for just an easier accessibility. So you might check out those. I know Matt has several. I could go on and start listing them, but he's check out for sure. He's by the now current conductor, the Marine Band, Ryan Nowlin, titled "Let Freedom Ring." And I was just telling you about this before we started, and the publication date at the bottom of the score says year 2014, and I only learned about it recently. So I'm going to pretend like it's brand new and everyone should play it, or maybe it's been around for a while and I just totally missed the boat. It's one of these things I think has a little bit of Americana like throughout the whole thing, but as a whole, like it just sounds. It has that sound, what we sort of iconic Copeland type sound. And then of course, if you have a band that's like really, 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 really great, um, Carolyn Bremer has a piece called "Early Light" that I love to do paired with the Star Spangled Banner because it's based on the big action moment. Well, say does that Star Spangled, that whole bit, but it's like a fantasy kind of in 6/8 through that. There's a moment where there's a whip crack and it sounds like a baseball piece, and so I love to do that piece right into the Star Spangled Banner. And I don't have that score in front of me, but memory serves me correctly. It ends in B flat major, and I've just gone straight to the national anthem.
Hmm.
Like at the end of it, like crack, bum 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 off, boom boom boom. So it's two pieces, kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, Americana-ish.
Yep. We will get right back to our content, but I wanted to thank you for being such an amazing band director that you're taking your time and listening to a band director podcast. There's many options out there, and I appreciate you very much taking in this content. I hope that you understand that your students are very lucky to have you as their band director, that you're continuing to grow, and that they are going to benefit from your improved skills as a band director. You can share this episode with any band director friends or other music education friends who can learn from this content because good pedagogy is good pedagogy. And if you could take a moment and go to thegrowingbanddirector.com and you'll be able to sign up on our Patreon platform to give at least $5 or $3 a month. And it helps the content continue to be created for you to help our profession grow. Let's go back to our scheduled episode.
Yeah.
The couple that I thought of, obviously you have, I got to look at my notes here. Wow, it's been a long day. American Salute, right? There's the original Morton Gould.
Oh, for sure.
But if people don't know the Douglas Wagner Grade 3, it is spectacular, and at times it sounds like the same piece, and that's playable. And then here's a classic arrangement that I had no idea existed until 2 years ago was Hymn for the Lost and Living from Saving
Mm.
Private Ryan. That's a grade
Yep.
two, Michael Sweeney. And there's the lavender that's harder. I mean,
Sure.
all slow music is hard. So
Oh,
I'm not saying it's easy. It's just, it's accessible for sure
yeah.
and really gorgeous. I actually did it. I added the choir part
Oh, cool.
to the Mike Sweeney arrangement. We basically took the original choir part, which is an A flat, and then like moved
Fine.
it to so it's like a whole fourth off, but we
Oh,
definitely
perfect.
I had an arranger kind of redo it so we could have the choir with the band and all that. That was pretty
Sure.
effective.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. And so many of those pieces, I think you can layer that back in, right? And then, especially if it's Americana source material, not just sound, but any sorts of those things. I'm constantly inviting people to along on those sorts of things. Anytime I can get the audience involved in something like that, especially patriotic or
Mm-hmm.
anything where I know that they know the words and can be involved. Christmas music, those sorts of things. It's always a great opportunity to sort of break that, the fourth wall that we talk about. Like, oh, this is a concert. You're the people. You play. But I think anytime you can do that, it sounds like you did it with a choir from your school, but even just getting people to sing along with you. Something
Mm-hmm.
like, My Country 'Tis of Thee. There's 55,000 arrangements, and when Johnny comes marching home, depending on how difficult you want to go, right? Do you want to go all the way into the Gould and really go for it, or do you want to find an arrangement that might be a little more accessible? I think there's a lot of options there.
Yeah, when I did it, I actually did it with our second band, and then
Oh yeah.
our top band acted as the choir. So
Oh, perfect.
that was like a whole thing that we worked on with the top
Cool.
band. So it was a cool
That's awesome.
opportunity.
Yeah, that's
Um,
awesome.
so I think so today we're gonna kind of stick most of our time on the conducting aspect of things. Um, you did a presentation at WASB this past year in Korea.
Yeah,
Um,
in Gwangju, South Korea, it was incredible.
and I will just say, this is just the young band teacher in me. Um, look like their sound, right?
Look like
Um,
their sound.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Are we assuming this is a high level sound?
No, I think look like their sound, meaning look like the way you want them to sound.
Yeah.
I know some of you aren't going to be seeing this video, you're going to be listening. So let me just paint a picture for you. Imagine you're in a rehearsal and what you're looking at looks like something straight out of a Looney Tunes video, sort of a bashing whack-a-mole attack conductor of this, like, rah, I call it the pusher, right? And you see that going on the podium, and they stop and say, "Could we play softer?" Right? And you're like, "What? It's not what I'm seeing." Right? And so I think one of the things, I see so many great teachers of all ages, right, modeling wonderful sounds on their instruments. I'm going to play on my trumpet this concert B flat, and then you're going to echo me, metronome back and forth, just building tone with your students. And they're doing all this work, and then they might put down that trumpet and pick up their baton like a 2x4 in their hand, right, and just go koto, right? And it's like, well, you just told them that on your beautiful Yamaha Zeno that you just played the Halsey trumpet sonata like beautifully 6 months ago when you graduated from your undergrad recital. You sound like velvet, and then you conduct the first note, and it looks like we're playing baseball. I think there's a lot of ways for us to be able to model the sound we hope to hear by just the way we move. And I think if you ask any great choir teacher, you go into any great room with a choral director, they're lowering their jaw, they're showing big vowels, they're modeling all these sounds. And what a great way for students to see that. And so I think for us, if we're going to model a sound that we want our students to respond to, especially when we put our instrument down, if that be saxophone or whatever instrument you're using for modeling, how do we look like their sound? And what parts of the body, like what represents what? And like, how do you teach that to your players?
Mm-hmm.
Working with
Excelsior Music Publishing is proud to sponsor the Growing Band Director podcast with a roster of imaginative composers, including composers who have been featured on this podcast, such as Carol Britton Chambers, Laura Estes, and Tyler Arcari. Excelsior Music Publishing provides new music for concert band, jazz ensemble, solo and ensemble, as well as books and resources for all levels and occasions, including a large and festive selection of music for your fall, holiday, and Christmas concerts. Find your perfect next piece at excelsiamusic.com. That's EXCELCIA music.com.
our basic conducting class here at Butler University. The students take in their junior year after they finished their theory rotation. And one of the things I always start with in basic conducting with them is that you're 20 years old. You've been playing this instrument for probably 7 or 8 years. You've not taken a conducting class until now. Yet, if you took your instruments out, we could all make music together right now. You know what you're looking at. Our job is to just put it into action. And so I think when we approach it like that, like you have a nation, you're already modeling it in many ways. Let's see if we can connect the physicality of that to what we're doing on the podium and look like the sound we expect them to hear. Is that different for every age level? Yeah, I think so. But I think we can all agree that a beautiful resonant concert F, regardless of, you know, the wonderful band that beginners that your wife starts with, like, 65 million students at Westbrook Middle School, her big beginner band, she's modeling this wonderful sound for them to respond to, and whether that be an echo or just I'll play and then let's try and join. How do we do that once we pick up the baton and continue to say, oh, it's always like this, oh, those sorts of things. So that's kind of been my approach to this. It's certainly not I'll just call it what it is. It's certainly not a turtleneck approach to the way we do conducting. It's sort of like, I think a one size could fit anyone. Not a one size fits all, but a one size could fit anyone depending on how you sort of tool it.
And I think we're going to go through a lot of the practical things that you do in this. So people are going to get some conducting advice, and hopefully they keep one hand on the wheel as they practice some of the stuff that we're going to be doing.
Yeah. If you were driving a stick shift, which no one does anymore, but if you were driving a stick shift, you may want to pull over.
I wanted to first kind of just dive into real quickly, like the reasons that as a band director, we forget about the conducting aspect of it. Right. I'm just going to think, like, you're painting the marching band props and you're moving, like, you're doing all the things that you've done before, like that come with the job. It's like you're thinking about everybody else all the time. And if you're doing your job, you're making time for score study, right? And you're doing all these things, but sometimes you get up there and you're like, oh, I haven't actually thought about how I'm conducting this, right? So the point is not to make any of us feel bad about not being, refined conductors, because a lot of us had, what is standard? Is it 2 years of conducting basically as an undergrad?
Sure.
Yeah. And some of us, it's been a couple decades since that. And some people get more and some people, have less or whatever. I also know that there is a correlation between being athletic, like being coordinated, and being a conductor, right? So some people are naturally, like, one of the best conductors I saw in college was Phil Edelman, because he was a great tennis player, and also a fabulous musician. So that combination I always found really, really great. But not everybody sort of has that naturally in how they were born. So first, I want people to recognize, if you're not an amazing conductor, that's okay. Like, you're working on your students, right?
Yep.
And we're hoping that this episode is going to help people with some things they can think about. Austin Custom Brass is a proud sponsor of today's podcast. They can be found online at austincustombrass.biz. The Austin Custom Brass shop is located in Kansas City, Missouri. They're frequent attendees at MEAs around the country, including a TMEA in Texas and Kansas and Missouri. They go to Midwest and Chicago and International Trumpet Guild. And give them a call today at 816-410-0826. If it's anything brass, they have it. Beginner to professional. This is a startup company from many years ago that's grown and grown and grown. Trent Austin has done a fantastic job with this. They're great people. They have many types of instruments, from Adams to Rath trombones and Shires and Getzen and Edwards and Schilke and Lotus and Crotoir and many, many more. They have many new and pre-owned instruments. You can check them out online again at austincustombrass.biz. They also offer a great selection of high-quality, budget-conscious brass instruments for students and band programs, including being the exclusive dealer for Manchester Brass, great company. They also offer Brass Spire, Carroll Brass, John Packer, Y. Fort, and of course, their own wonderful line of instruments, Austin Custom Brass Doublers line. Give them a call today at 816-410-0826 and find out why they can help you grow as a brass player. There are remarkable resources for all brass players, and they will do POs and work within your budget for your band program to get you what you need for your kids. So next, like, say you go to Music for All and you're in your clinic, I mean, you're adjudicating 100 bands, right? You see a ton of bands in a weekend or whatever it is. What are some of the most common things that you see that you would fix from the conductor's standpoint?
I will say that not always. Again, and nothing is really ever 100%. I'm just going to say most of the time. Most of the time, when I hear a group at a concert festival playing that is musical, they are looking at someone who is moving pretty musically. I think, don't get me wrong, I teach at the university level. This has been my life for this is my 8th year of university teaching, and before that, teaching high school band in New Mexico. I have sort of a general rule of thumb in rehearsal. If I'm working with the ensemble metronome and we're working pitch references with the harmony director or something like that, if I'm working with a metronome, I don't conduct. because I think that my job is to provide more information than just the metronome. So I'll just turn that sucker on and we go. If I take the metronome out, then I am conducting and I am working to try and be musical and give them more information that's on the page. What I would say as far as like conductor pitfalls, so to speak, I think that you were talking about painting the field, all those, like all these other thousands of jobs that we have to do. I think that sometimes we think that if we don't do everything on the podium, the piece will not go on. Right? If I don't start trumpets on beat 1, horns on beat 4, trombones breathe now and off clarinets and second trumpet right now, dig it, right? Those sorts of things. I think if we don't do all of those things, the piece will come off the rails. And I think it's I can't remember if this is a Bob Reynolds quote where he's basically said a group should sight read at like 80% of what they're capable of, and like I'll tell you what, my group does not sight read at 80%. I don't know anyone who does. So when we're fighting through some of those things and learning some of those tips and tricks, in that sight read, I'm probably over conducting a little bit. Just showing extra information. Oh, this is here. Oh, you're here now. But the goal really for me is to teach students how to listen. And I think as a conductor, if we prepare, when I hear these really musical groups, they're musical because the conductor is moving in a way that looks like a phrase, looks like, more than just time. And they're thinking like that as well. It's demonstrated in the way they move. And they're allowing students to make choices. Case in point, for those of you not watching, I'll just try to explain this, but I think sometimes, and I did this forever, so like, let me just call it out. I wanted the group to play exactly with me. So, which works great if you're doing a really fast piece where everyone has that makes sense, right? This huge breath and play exactly here. But I'll never forget the day Gary Hill, my teacher at Arizona State, introduced me to this idea of purposeful ambiguity. I could not get the wind orchestra to start together. It was just like, and they're all doctoral and master's students. And I thought, well, what am I doing wrong? And Gary just came up and picked up his hands. And instead of stopping, like play now, he just took a breath and went right through this imaginary space, this ictus that we all imagine, right? The table that you strike for people to play. He just went right through it. And all of the 52 players in the room went, oh. And I was like, well, that's magic. And what it taught me over the years, and as I read more about the psychology of responding in physical response and the way we see people move, is that actually everything we should do should look on the podium should look exactly like it does in reality. I go back to that conversation about the pusher at the beginning of this, right? Like basically playing whack-a-mole with a baton in their hand and then they stop. That was too loud. Well, I'm looking at loud, right? What if you walked up to someone and they opened their arms, you would expect a hug, right? If someone put their hand out in front of you, you might expect them that they're stopping you, right? Similar to like a crosswalk, it's just extending your hand. If someone moved in a really angular way, you would expect that to be sort of rigid movement, sort of like a brittle sound. If someone moved flowingly like a cirrus cloud separates in the sky when you look at it, you don't expect the accompaniment soundtrack to that sound to be right? It's just like, oh, it's probably like an Eric Whitacre piece, right? Like those are the sorts of things that I think we forget about. We get so wrapped up in the in basic conducting, I learned down, in, out, up, floor, window, walls, all these things, that it's like, actually, the only thing I'm supposed to do in this measure is take a breath and let them start. And then I'm going to hang out on this note for a while before I move to the next note, and just being aware of those sorts of things in your study. You mentioned finding time for score study. Oh my gosh, it's the worst thing on your to-do list, because it's the worst thing on my to-do list. Because you know what? No one knows if you studied last night or not, except for you. And you don't have all of the quote-unquote moves on the podium just because you studied last night, right? There's no, if I got a haircut yesterday, you'd notice. But that doesn't work with score study. It's like, oh, I got a buzz cut. I have learned ligature posing, right? Like It doesn't work like that. It's time and time and time and time, and then it's time again and time again.
I do want to I want to jump in. I actually did a whole episode, which I almost never do solo episodes, but it was like what 6 months ago, and it was called "You Can Gain Energy Through Score Study." Because I found that as a public school teacher, we're engrossed in everything that's happening in the school, whether it come to lunch duty, like all the stuff that we did not.
Yeah,
I mean, we signed up for it, but like that's not why we want to be there,
sure.
right? And then I would just get down from day to day, or like say the kids are being emotional or whatever. Like some days you don't want to be with these kids because they're acting a certain way, right?
Yeah.
But if you've spent time with Copeland, and
Oh
then
yeah.
in rehearsal, it's like you and Copeland and the kids happen to be there. Like I just found I was in a much better mood when I understood more about the piece, because then I could get excited about it personally. And then if I was excited about it, I could get the kids excited about it. Be like, hey, the reason this is so cool is because of this half step, and you're the half step, and you know what I mean? Like you can
Oh yeah.
delve into it. And to me, it was like the energy of that was a boost over just it's period 4W on a Wednesday and let's go, you know?
Yep. Oh, totally. I think that's it. Definitely is something musical that feeds us and gives us that added energy that we miss from other things. It is wonderfully rewarding to paint the perfectly straight line on a field. Like no bumps. I didn't sneeze while I was dragging this thing. I didn't wear my good shoes today and I ruined yet another pair because I'm painting and I have to paint. Yeah, that's super rewarding. Oh, we got out of the parking lot on time with all the buses and the equipment trucks, like all those things, right? Those are rewarding moments as a band director to say we're on schedule. We did this task, we did all of those things. But there are few moments that we can go back and find musical fulfillment, right? And I think we get caught up so much in the beginning of like, oh, that's F sharp, not F natural. So that's, why, who's still natural on the clarinets? Which finger is that? Like, index finger or middle finger? What are you doing over there? That sometimes it's really easy. And thank goodness that we're all usually the smartest, trained, highest trained instrumentalist in that room because we're teachers of students. I think the thing that spooks me more than anything is working with colleagues and professionals. And over the years, having done more of that, knowing, there was a time in my career where I was like, oh, I got to prepare more because I'm going to be conducting my colleagues, or I'm going to be working in a professional ensemble or adults concert band. And what I realized was like, wait a minute, my whole life, my whole career has been working with students. Why would I give them less than I might give to these adults, right? Oh, I'm going to spend extra time every week preparing this L'Histoire de Soldat until I get all the 3/8, 5/8, all that exactly ready. So my trumpet teacher and violin percussion colleague think that I'm just the best. Well, I'm going to work with them once every multiple years, right? But those students that I'm feeding them music daily and collaborating with them, they deserve that all the time. And so that's what puts me at the desk at night. That's what puts me back with rehearsal recordings. And I don't have all the answers, certainly. I think that my ears are okay in rehearsal, but I record every rehearsal because I just don't trust myself. And I go back and listen to things and go, oh, that's what I thought for sure. Or like, why didn't I stop and fix that? What was I thinking? Was I in a hurry for something else? So I think I would love to still have a teacher. Maybe you're a young band director out there, or maybe you're someone who's been doing this for a long time and you too long for a teacher or a mentor. I tell the students all the time where our rehearsals here start at 2:25. And probably until I came to Butler, so the first 5 years of my college teaching career, at 5 minutes to every rehearsal, I was looking around the room waiting for Steve Pratt or Gary Hill to walk in. Like, there's no way this can be my rehearsal. Like, how do I have the information to do this? But over the years, I've gained that, and that's been through just spending time with the music. And there's no fast track. I tell students all the time in basic conducting, this year especially, our university issued a huge thing about AI in classrooms. Faculty members have to either approve it or disapprove of it, but you have to say it in the syllabi. And I told them, if you can find a path through AI to learn a score faster, I want to know about it because I'm going to start using it. And I don't think it exists. It's not possible. It's like not scanning it into my brain. But I think there's that. I say that all that to say there's no cut. But that rewarding time, like you're saying, spending time with Copeland, spending time with whoever. I mean, whatever your group's playing, don't be afraid to really dive in deep there. And if you don't have a teacher or a mentor, ask around for someone. I have the great joy of visiting a lot of schools here and working with band director colleagues who I would say are colleagues. And in the last few weeks in being in schools, 3 different places, someone has introduced me to their band, their high school band. This is Dr. Blanco, who teaches at Butler University, good friend of our band program and one of my mentors. And I want to die a little bit because that word mentor feels like a really important task, like a really important job. And so, and I'm still looking for my own mentors, especially conducting.
I did want to mention one thing that people can do that's really practical is videotape your rehearsal and then find someone and just send it to them, somebody who can help you, even if you don't consider them older than you, it doesn't matter. Like they can be in your rehearsal, take a videotape of it, send it, be like, give me some feedback,
And can I tell you that
it could be a 30-second clip if it's a conducting thing, and be like, give me some.
And can I tell you what's even more about that? Record yourself and watch it. I don't have a teacher that lives nearby. Mr. Pratt comes in and works with my band about once a semester here at Butler because he's retired from Indiana. And I record at least one every other week. And I watch it. And it is, Kyle, it is miserable. And I'm not saying because I'm a bad conductor. It's just that all these things that we plan to do and execute in a certain way in the moment can go out the window, right? Unless we've really made habits of them. And so over time, I'm able to kind of on myself. And so, yeah, especially if you're just getting started, videotape yourself from time to time. You'd be amazed at how many times I can hear it now. Over the years of experience of doing this for a while, I can hear when my hands are unclear at the beginning of a note. All right, let's have everybody at rehearsal P. Here we go. And lift go. And if I hear a sound that's, I'll just stop. Let's go back to P again. I'll be more clear. And that usually solves the problem 2 ways. 1, it tells them that wasn't together. But 2, it says, I'm keeping an eye on myself. I'm not going to say, that was a horrible start. What's wrong with you people? Because if it's one person, it's kind of excusable, right? One person, someone sneezed or someone breathed early or whatever. If you give a breath and you hear the group come in like you dropped a bag of dried rice on the top of the snare drum, right? The problem is not them, right? It's us and our execution. So I think it's really critical. Audio, video, something. Bring someone in to keep an eye out on you. Because we're creatures of, they just sneak in.
So we're going to start getting to some practical things that people can do. And I'm just going to tell a story I've told in the podcast before. It was about 14 years ago at the University of North Texas Collegium that happened. And Alan McMurray that's where I met him for the first time. I also think of you when I think of him because he came in and did Allstate and then you came in the year after. Remember you saying,
to fill.
What am I going to do? Yeah, they was both spectacular. But I was doing Albanian dance and I first started, of course, I was the guy in Texas who wore the white shirt because I was really hot. It was my coolest shirt. And then they're making fun of me because I'm the guy who wore a white shirt when I'm conducting, which apparently we're not supposed to do. So I stopped doing that then. But then I couldn't get the UNT Wind Symphony to play together. They weren't with me. So it was clearly me, right? It was one of those experiences.
Sure.
Then he came and worked with me. And what I took away from it, long story short, was, my kids got used to seeing how I conducted and just did what I asked them to do. But it wasn't clear because I wasn't using enough wrist. I was using, shoulder and elbow and not enough wrist. And the minute I clarified a couple things, it improved a ton. And literally that was worth the entire week is just going home and improving on that thing. So as we go through this presentation, if there's one thing that people latch onto, it can be career changing for you.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I think before we dive into the process, I want to tell everyone, if you have not checked out a video, I'm going to tell you about it and maybe we can link it up in the, in the show notes, Kyle. There's a podcast by the great conductor Carl St. Clair, who's the music director of the Pacific Symphony. Carl is a band convert. Him, along with the late Larry Ratcliffe, who was at Rice University for a long time, were both band folks. They taught at the University of Michigan, and I call them orchestra converts, right? They've had huge careers. And Carl's got a TED Talk video from a TEDx event in California on conducting, and he talks about conducting and distills it to these three types. And I think that if you take, we'll talk about some technique and some ideas through this next chunk of time, but there's three things in there that he talks about. And he says there are three types of conductors. They're either outside, 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 inside, or inside, inside. And what he basically says, and inside, someone could know all of the music, right? You could know all the music really, really well. You've developed through your study gesture. That music's inside your oral ear. It's inside the way you move, and you can lead music in a really, really meaningful, powerful way. He gives some great examples in there. Or you can be outside, outside. You don't know the music. You're looking at it. You've not interpreted it. You've not thought through the way it goes. It's outside your realm of gestures. It's outside your oral ear. You couldn't sing it if you had to. And I think sometimes we just think that like that's where it lives, right? Like there's no way for me to really memorize this, right? I can't memorize it, so why would I try? And I guess I'll just be at rehearsal 5 minutes on the podium before the students get there, and I'll figure out what I'm going to do. But I think going back to what I hear so often at concert festivals is the beginning of a piece is always great. The end of the piece is always great. But sometimes the middle can be real messy because you just ran out of time. And I think that comes from our score study, from our planning, from our interpretation of ideas to go, this piece is ABA. I don't need to budget much time at the end. I need to budget all the time in the first two parts. And that's a simple thing. That's a band director thing. That's not a quote unquote conducting thing. That's just a rehearsal planning thing. And I always tell folks, how fast would you teach drill in the fall if you didn't know how many pages you had?
Fast.
I don't know.
Real fast.
Yeah, you would just be going. You would just blasting it on, right? You'd be learning it. And so, we have the great fortune in concert music to know when our concerts are due, quote unquote, right? When they're going to happen. And we know all of our music ahead of time. So how do we use our score study to plan that rehearsal block, as you're going forward? And anyways, I think Carl's video on this is something that everyone should see who's any type of conductor from the beginning of your career to you've been doing this for 5 years. I watch it once this semester, every fall semester with my conducting students because I just think it's that good.
Trae, there's been rehearsals where I feel like, okay, the piece is, 200 measures long. We have to work on all of it. And I just get overwhelmed and I end up wanting to work on too much rather than being okay with, let's just focus on a small part, and one thing that really helped me with that, there was 1 year, a few years ago when like children's march is a classic example, right? It's like the thing you could work on, but what are we going to choose in this 30 minutes to work on? Mm-hmm. Are we going to work to master this section or are we going to just try to play a lot like that whole thing? And there's different times to do either one, right? Sure. But to me, it was as we were putting together a marching band show, I was thinking, how is this any different? Like this week, We're focusing on whatever, the ballad and the intro, whatever. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to wait to work on that later. And so I thought of it more as that puzzle piece. Like I don't have to get to all of it this week. Let's just get better at something. And then next week we'll kind of stack the next thing. And there was that marching 100%. Band show side of things that kind of led me towards that.
100%. We played something today in my rehearsal. We've been in school. This is the beginning of our 4th week of rehearsal. And we rehearsed a part of a piece today that the students had not seen since we read it in the sight read. And it's for that reason. I will not do a lot of stuff badly in one day. I would rather do distilled versions or smaller chunks and really get them right and then move on, because then they'll remember it. If you can learn something really well, people will say, well, I don't see that works fine with college players. Listen, we're teaching undergraduates, right? Every undergraduate student, every freshman at any undergrad institution on the face of the planet was in your band room last. They are in 13th grade. Mm-hmm. They aren't like magically taking auditions at the Cleveland Orchestra that are open. They are in 13th grade, right? There is no magic, right? So I think that sometimes people tell me that, well, that works with good players. No, I think they need to see the division. And so my rehearsal schedule for a concert prep looks like that. This day we're doing X amount. This day we're doing this amount. This day we're going to put those two things together on that piece and put something else new. And that comes from study. That comes from planning. That comes from knowing what the heck I'm getting myself into.
Yep.
I don't just divide it like, oh, we're going to get through 41 measures of this piece, right? Beep bum, beep bum, beep bum, beep bum bum. Okay,
Stop.
that's 41. Right? That wouldn't make any sense. That would be
Yeah.
ridiculous. So,
When we were talking off air, you said that there is a word that is not allowed
I
in your classes, and that's the word cue.
yeah, the word cue. I we don't use the word cue in conducting, and it's because I don't think that any specific player needs your cue, whatever we want to call that looks like it's landing an airplane. I think when I hear students talking about, I got to practice I got to practice that cue. Like, what do you mean you got to practice that cue? Like, is this a pool game? Like, what are you doing, right? I definitely tell the students that every gesture, every movement that you make should be towards, including, or moving towards someone. So it's not like I'm telling people not to cue the trombones to enter. But this idea of like, I think we were talking about this before we started recording, right? But sometimes I go and someone's conducting and it's like 1 and 2 and 1, 2, ready, and trumpets 2, 3, trombones and horns and clarinets off and flutes, 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 oboe 2, check your reed 2, and oboes and ready and 1, 2, here you go, play, right? And to me, what we've said is that the only thing is important is when you come in. Nothing else after that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that you have to come in at the right place. But like, I'll tell you what, I've heard a lot of people come in at the right place to start a concert B flat scale. And after things go for a while and everyone's in different tempos, it's not still a concert B flat scale, right? Mm-hmm. So we can't say that the beginning entrance, the cue to start is the thing. So I tell the students when we work on conducting, and they're conducting small groups or big groups, what is your intention in this measure? What are you looking for? They'll say, well, I want to invite the tenor voice to play on beat 3. Okay, what does it sound like? How loud is it? Where's the tenor voice seated? Right? And what does that look like for you? Okay, great. Where you come from? Well, on measure 1, or beat 1, I invited these people to play. And now on beat 3, I invited these other people to play. Okay, practice going from one space to the other. Mike Haycock at Michigan calls this shape flow, right? How do the shapes that you make to display the sound, right? If they were snapshots from different beat to beat, in different parts of your physicality, that flow from one to the other determines how the piece goes. You can't have, and now I can't stop singing children's march, right? But you can't have beat-um, boom, beat-um, boom, beat-um, beat-um, but with someone moving really rigid. Beat-um, ooh, beat-um, ooh, beat-um, right? I'm pretending to be like a nutcracker almost as I move so rigidly. And for those of you listening, that doesn't have any musical intent. Oh, but I need to cue them. Well, do you, right? I think sometimes I'm really stuck on cues because students won't count their measures of rest. And I try, even in honor bands, when I go to do honor bands, and I was just up there with you all in Maine doing the All-State band. If someone missed an entrance, I always ask, is there anything I can do to help you there? And most of the time when you ask a student this, they will say, no, I need to count.
Yep.
I've never had a student tell me, yeah, I don't want to count. Could you tell me when to play? No, because they all feel bad because they just missed it. So I think sometimes we're just sort of compensating for that. Like, oh, I'll just tell you when to come in. And so then I wonder how much are those students actively listening, right?
And
so
on the side, that's like an independence thing, right? Like, so I just
Bingo.
did an episode with Scott Jones from Ohio State, and it was all basically about helping your students become more independent and relying on you less. So again, you've been in all the levels of classrooms. I still remember you subbing for me when I had to be home with my kids and like working with our second band and working with our 7th grade band, and like you were there all the time. So all these levels, but they need more as they're younger, but you can still work on their independence.
For sure. I think then the younger the player, the further you need to know your scores, because the further in front of the music you need to be, right? I could turn and look at you, a really trained musician, excellent player, a beat before you play, give you a beautiful left hand lift breath, and just expect you to play the first note on the trumpet just absolutely like velvet. Now, a seventh grader needs a little more time than that. Doesn't mean they can't execute on that level for themselves, for their abilities, but we can't surprise them. And the only way to not surprise them by, too ready and now, right, is by preparing the score and developing what your vocabulary will be, your shape flow to go, okay, the trumpets have to enter on the downbeat of measure 8. Okay? The previous car wreck that I'm dealing with is at rehearsal 6, and it's when the snare drum enters, and they love to rush. So I'm going to be coming from the snare drum to the trumpet. Okay, what's that going to be like for me? Jugga-dugga, 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 jugga. I'm going to move in a measure. I'm going to be with the trumpets for a measure, and I'm going to be looking at them with intent and energy so they know what that sound's going to be like. And then I'm going to breathe for 2 beats with them because I know that those players need extra air. And then I'm going to really give them a downbeat that's firm because I know that that will really encourage them to do it. And then the next year you might play the same piece, and your experience might be that the trumpet players are terrified if you look at them. They're amazing, but God forbid you look at them and then they just shrivel. We've all had these people, right? Then your shape flow might be different that year in that same piece. You might go snare drum, zoga doga 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 doga, give the trumpets a thumbs up and look away, right? But that comes from score study, from what your knowledge is of the piece and what you want to happen, combined with your knowledge of the players in the room. And when we do those two things together, I think that's where we really can set up students to be successful on their own, more independent. But we can't do the same thing for everyone. And I think when we say the word cue and we just dilute it all down to that, we're saying that everyone needs the same thing. And someone who's teaching in public school every single day, you know this, right? The amount of diverse learners in all of our rooms is unbelievable. So the idea that a single cue works for all, I think is just, we can all do more than that.
Yeah. And sometimes your cue needs to involve a fingering, or the fingering on measure before,
Yeah.
The middle finger down, not the middle finger up is definitely.
Yeah.
So we were talking about how different parts of your arm relate to different ways that you play. Let's talk about wrist and how it relates to the attack.
So I talk to our students all the time that they must write in the articulation for whatever they're conducting, specifically on every single note, the way that they want it to happen. And again, I'm not saying you have to do this with Anne McGinty's Red Balloon, right? You might know the piece pretty well. You do your own thing. This is for students. We're building basic conducting from like the ground up. So we're talking about if the articulation is quick and requires a quick, tongue, something staccato or something, right? Then I'm going to try and do everything in my human power to make the tip of my baton react exactly the way I expect their tongue to articulate, right? There's no situation in my conducting vocabulary baton would be doing exactly as I was just describing this, right? Quick flick from a part up just above the plane, an angle just above the plane, and returning back to that. I would never do that and expect them to play in Hork style graves, right? That would be, and you laugh. People will laugh when they hear this in their car, but I see it all the time, right? Just like the articulation of the hand doesn't match your expectation is of the players. So that's the first place I would say you start with. And something that just means like sitting on your hands for a while. I think Mallory Thompson, Dr. Thompson Western, I think it's her quote, but she used to say, if you start conducting a piece right away before you know it, the piece will go the way your hands will be only as musical as your hands can be. And that really stuck with me because I think we all think of ourselves as people who have a pretty broad conducting vocabulary. Like, I know how to do really cool things, right? And when they're appropriate, it makes all the sense in the world. But if we just pick up our hands and start looking at a brand new piece, that go only the way we can make our hands go. So I would say really be specific about your wrist and your articulation when you're practicing your conducting. When you're looking at a score, what kind of staccato is this, right? If we have orchestra folks listening with us today, their orchestra staccato for Mozart or Haydn is very different than our band staccato for Randall Standridge or John Mackey, right? Which is a very different staccato than Nishimura writes for us in Chasing Sunlight with a slur over the top of the whole thing, right? Like, I think those are all different things. And to say to ourselves, how do I want the students to do that? And how can I represent that in my wrist? So I think that's the big thing. The second part is I teach that our air, the air that you want students to move through the instrument, is how much you're going to move your arm. So if I want just a simple, as I went back to earlier, I've got a quick wrist flick that I just described earlier, like as if I was flicking a fly off the tip of my baton, turning back to where I came from. My arm's not really moving. It's bouncing a little bit, like it's moving because it's got a little momentum, but it is not like really activated. If I'm conducting a staccato piece that might be longer, I now have more air involved in the length of that note. Well, then I need to let my arm read a little bit more in the length of that note to match. Right? It's not that it's all like a 2x4. It's responding to the way the air moves. And I think just like we talked about earlier, if everything we do on the podium looks like reality, our students don't need to take mine or anyone else's basic conducting class. They just go, Mr. Smith looks like peanut butter on a PB&J sandwich, like moving really slow and almost like he's underwater. I bet I probably shouldn't play dot, 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 dot. And Jason Kasler has done this, director of bands at Arizona State, has done this workshop several times with players where he does improvisation. They play whatever they want. And it's amazing to me that, and respond to his gesture. And it's amazing to me after a while how unified the sound becomes and how, like, cohesive it is. And they have no music. And it's like, well, it's just because we're doing what we expect from reality. But if we're a pusher, if we're throwing our arms like we're playing whack-a-mole, and we get mad that they're playing loud, well, what do you think? It looks loud.
So a question I have for you is, what are some practical ways band directors could train their ensemble to respond to their gestures during their warm-up time?
I'm so glad you asked, Kyle. 65,000 people across the universe play the F articulation study. If you play the Eddie Green book, I think it's 2-2. If you use Mike Pote's book Process for ensembles, I think it's 1-, it's not 1-1, but do, rest, 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 quarter, 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 rest, staccato, staccato. You're familiar, right? We've all played something like this. I've always asked the students, if it's too rigid, do you sound like the way I move, right? Or if it's too gooey, do you sound like the way I move? And if I was a conductor trying to train my arms into these sorts of things, I would be asking myself, could I demonstrate every single one of those measures? Could I demonstrate connected legato half notes and still be in time? So often when we conduct slow music and lyrical music, we're out of time. If you want to know if you're really out of time in slow music, videotape it, mute it, watch it on playback without sound, and subdivide from when you're striking the beats. Ta and 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 ta. And then I'm mad at the group for not being together, right? It's like we have to really train ourselves to be able to do that. I think the most underdeveloped muscle group for any conductor on the face of the planet is the muscle groups of the forearm. And I don't say that because you need to be able to lift muscle. You don't need to be flexed while you conduct. I say that because it takes these like finite little muscles to be able to just barely tap a baton in a way that like really is meaningful, very small. Like, could you conduct staccato at 1 inch? You know, I think of my life as a percussionist for a long time, right? Practicing stick heights until, I died, and then waking up and resurrecting and practicing stick heights again. But can I conduct staccato, Mozart staccato, Jupiter Symphony, to make it match at 1 inch tall? And can I do it at 1 foot tall, right? And if I can do that, then I've sort of achieved that articulation. Okay, now what if I had to do a different type of staccato, a different volume? This idea of training your wrist to match the skill set you have your students do, take home your warm-up packet. How many of us have built our own custom technique or warm-up packet for our bands? Because we all know this, right? I'm not bashing any publishers. I'm just saying every technique book is a compromise for somebody. Mm-hmm. So What if you took the first 5 pages of your student's technique book that you have them working on, ensemble skills book, whatever you're working on, and ask yourself, if I was a student and I was playing 1-6, whatever that exercise is in your book, but instead of playing it, I was conducting it, could I turn off the audio and would it still look like 1-6? And if the answer is no, then we probably don't know the piece as well as we expect that we do. And the thing that I'll tell you that is the golden magic rule of score study is that if you learn the piece 1-6 to execute it just perfectly wonderful the way you expect your students to hear it, and you can represent it, the second you can do that, you will hear every single flaw in their sound without question. You won't be guessing anymore. Was that rehearsal today good or bad? Or did we do that okay? No, because you'll have such an aural image of exactly how you want it to go because you trained your arm that way that you'll just say, oh, no. Why are we getting louder on beat 2? Okay, again. Oh, saxophones, why are you sitting on beat 3? Oh, it goes below the staff. I'm sorry that it's orchestrated that way, but you have to make it sound like it doesn't go below the staff. Let's try again. Right? All these things that really just start like, boom, leaping out to you like fireworks that you've spent the last 2 months going, I don't really know if we're getting any better. I don't know, right? I think that's the thing that I will tell you if you go through this process of really involved score study and practice, it's not in vain. Your ears can be completely transformed in what you hear in rehearsal because you have such a strong opinion of how things go that it will be worth every minute you spent poring over that score.
And you also have to make sure you're spending time in your warm-up training your band to watch you so that when you do this so well, they're actually going to pay attention to you. And there's thousands of ways you can do that. Even if you're just playing your 5-note scale, don't conduct it in time. Make it short, make it long, change tempos. If that's a consistent thing in your program, then kids know they're supposed to watch you. And they hopefully are watching you. But again,
For sure.
that's like an intentional, okay, not everything is with the metronome kind of thing. Or you can do it with the metronome and change the articulations on the spot. Just making sure they're aware that you're not just up there as a decoration.
Yep. I think Fred Ebbs, who was the director of bands at IU before Ray Kramer, who was there before my teacher, Mr. Pratt, for nearly 35 years, the IU Wind Ensemble began every rehearsal with Mr. Ebbs and Mr. Kramer did the addition of lip benders, a warm-up that many of us know. It's 11 exercises. There's nothing crazy. The players from the Wind Ensemble at IU were going on to Marine Band, professional orchestra across the country, and they started every day with lip benders. And I remember asking Mr. Pratt, what's up with that? And he said, I do a lip bender every day that I think will take us directly into whatever I'm working on that day. And I augment it and adjust my conducting for them to respond and that I want said piece to go. And then I use this as a direct segue when we go to it. Measure number 4 is this sort of scale passage, right? And if he was playing something that was like just bitingly angular, like Husa music for Prague, right? He would start that sucker with intensity, and you could hear the brass players like ready to just explode, right? And then he would soften. And it was like, yeah, I know what this is for. I see what this is for. He's training them. And it was amazing to me, the response that those players had during rehearsal because they had been given that information. The curtains were pulled back at Oz. It was like, this is how we do it. Now join me. And then when they did it, it was like a really rewarding experience for everyone. That collaboration of being able to respond successfully to what you're seeing and then getting the gratitude and feedback from the conductor that like, that was it. That loop we talked about, that feedback loop is so critical to the conducting experience. And so when you know what you want and you hear them and you model what you want and you hear them respond in a way that's appropriate to get the sound that you want, everyone's happier. And it goes way faster than wave, 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 stop. Could we play measure 6 through 8 softer? Wave, 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 stop. Could we play it even softer and more smooth? Wave, 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 stop. I said smooth, right? That takes a lot of time. right? To start and stop and give all those directions. So I just would encourage folks, just being with your scores to decide what you want to look like. It will completely transform the way your ears work. Your ears cannot decide how much is wrong and how much is right until they know what it is they're looking for. And the only way we can do that, unfortunately or fortunately, I guess it's both a blessing and a curse, is to spend time at the table with Copeland, with whoever, whatever piece you're rehearsing. Anne McGinty, Julie Giroux, I mentioned Kate Nishimura earlier, like 1,000 people. Whoever you're spending time with right now, spend more time with them in this idea and approach of what does my wrist do and what does my arm do, and how does that model what I'm explaining to my students.
Trae, thanks so much for being on the podcast today. How can people reach out to you if they want to?
In a million different ways. I'm on the socials, of course. You feel free to jump on and shoot me a friend request somewhere there. You can also reach out to me with any sort of professional questions, or if you want to film a video and send, I'm happy to take a peek at that. My university address, email address at Butler is T Blanco, T for Trae, and then my last name, Blanco, Trae Blanco at butler.edu. And I welcome any further discussions and chatting about projects and conducting things. And if you want a copy of the full presentation, I was telling Kyle, we kind of did a condensed version because there were so many musical examples that wouldn't have really read well over the listening, especially on the radio podcast format of this. So feel free to reach out. I think they'll be in the show notes. You can check out the whole presentation and see some specific musical results. I'll just say one last thing to sort of leave you with. I think we can all relate back to like the beginning of language arts classes for some of us, middle school, junior high, whenever that was. And there was all these questions you had to ask: who, what, when, where, why, and how. And I think if you'll approach a score, a brand new one, who needs my attention? What kind of attention? Where do they? When do they need it? Where do they sit? Why should I be with them and not so and so? And how will I do it with my wrist and my arm? I think if you can answer those questions, it's a doorway into the score from the beginning. And start with the big macro level, and then work your way down into micro, like a phrase at a time. And then eventually you're going to find yourself in a situation where you can't stop asking those questions. And that's where I think the real fruit of the labor is, when instead of being a burden to go and score study, you found yourself in a position where you don't want to stop because you still have so many questions.
We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.